Well, good morning, everyone. This is Chris Morton with AALU Gamma's Government Affairs team in Washington, D.C. Welcome this morning to our webinar deep dive into the stimulus bill, new rules that would apply to your business. This is a continuing series of webinars that we've done to unpack the details around the significant federal response to the COVID-19 circumstance here in the United States. And we're going to spend some time today really on the business focused provisions of principally the third stimulus package that was passed last week, as well as some of the other related provisions of the first two passed prior to that. As I get started here today, I will just say, as always, the health and safety of our AALU members, their well-being, and those that you serve is paramount. We hope everyone is taking care to follow the CDC guidelines and make sure that you are doing all that you can to stay safe. For those that are press who may be joining this call, I would ask that you certainly reach out to Catherine Knight Patterson, who's our Vice President of Communications, should you have questions or want to talk to the experts that will be on the phone with us today. Her number is 703-641-8142. Again, that's Catherine Knight Patterson. We'd be happy to dig in on questions you may have or provide you with any insights from our perspective. We have a lot of folks on the phone today. I think our total is somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 participants, which just highlights the importance and the challenge that many of you are facing. So our goal today really is to unpack this set of provisions around business relief and assistance, answer as many questions as we can. There is a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen for those of you who have dialed in to provide your questions. We will attempt to get to as many of those as we can. Obviously, with the number of participants that we have, we certainly won't get to every and all, but we will be providing additional analyses on our website. Both the AALU website, aalu.org, as well as the Gamma website, gammaweb.com, have a link to our COVID-19 Action Center, where we are providing all of the analyses around these particular federal responses. As I said, again, today we will be focused on the small business provisions, in particular of the relief package, and we will have those updated written analyses that will go deeper on all of these issues. We've done ones on the sick leave and the SBA loan programs that will be updated. We will also have a policy brief later this week on how the relief package is helping individuals, and a webinar on that topic next week. In addition, we're going to be releasing later this week analyses on how the stimulus or relief package deals with executive comp restrictions, particularly for those companies who is with me on the Government Affairs team for AALU Gamma in Washington, D.C. Army runs all of our policy and lobbying activity in Washington, as well as some targeted efforts that we undertake around the country in states. Army has been a terrific colleague and leader for us, so welcome, Army. We also have with us, and are pleased to have with us, Ken Keyes, AALU's outside counsel, managing director of the Federal Policy Group in Washington, D.C., and also one of the foremost tax policy experts in all of Washington, I would say, in all of the country, the former head of the Joint Committee on Taxation. So welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you both with us to help both our members the clients they serve, and those around the country who've dialed in, now 4,000 and counting.
Morning,
So
everybody.
let's just outline what we're going to cover today so everybody has a sense of exactly the buckets of issues that we want to systematically walk through. First is obviously the sick leave requirements and resources that we have both written about and talked about in our previous webinars. Secondly, the provisions that will allow the delay of employer payroll taxes for businesses. Then we want to get really much deeper around the SBA loans for small businesses. A lot of moving pieces there. I will say this bill or set of bills has been quick. It has been lengthy in terms of the provisions. There's a lot to unpack, and so we're still doing a lot of that. We're going to do our best to give answers. There may be some issues that we the net operating loss changes that were made in the last Bill 3.0 that was passed last week. So after we go through those provisions, then we're going to get to some of your questions. Again, we will try to get to as many as we can, and we will utilize all of the questions that come back to us to provide additional resources and analyses on our COVID-19 Action Center. So once again, thanks for joining us. And I want to now turn to the sick leave requirements and let Army walk us through that set of provisions.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. And we look forward to answering as many questions as we can, and keep those coming because they will improve our future written and live webinar products. I know there's a lot of focus on the SBA loans, and we'll get to that in a minute, but the sick leave requirement does go into effect this week. And so if you're a business or you have a client with a business who has employees who did not have sick leave prior to the enactment of the phase 2 bill, beginning on Thursday or Friday, I guess, you'll be required to offer 2 weeks of paid leave to full-time employees and a partially paid FMLA leave for an extended period to employees who are affected by the coronavirus, and that includes being sick, being quarantined, being forced to work from home, caring for someone who is sick or forced to work from home, and if your child care has been suspended, that is also covered under here. And you can see on our slide today, there are slightly different pay rates that cap out for each of those different considerations. We won't spend a ton of time on this today, but it is important to think through with your employees and talk to them about how they are helped in this. If we go to the in the initial analysis, it was going to be figured out on your 2020 return. Now it can be done quarterly, and that should assist a business in meeting this requirement for their employees on a more rapid pace basis. But it is an into your employees and out on the tax credit side. So it's fairly straightforward, but that we did want to highlight that today because it is a new requirement that begins this week. Ken, any comments on this before we go to SBA or payroll taxes? Ken, you may be on mute. Ken, are you on mute?
So while we wait for Ken, and apologies, obviously with the remote nature of some of this, we tend to have sometimes technical difficulties. while Ken gets acclimated there. Army, perhaps you can just sort of tick through this portion here if you want to give some high level commentary.
Sure. I'm glad to cover that. Let me answer one of the questions I've gotten through a variety of mediums. Yes, you are seeing me from the car office. There's a bit of excessive
Hey,
noise.
Army,
Oh, there he is.
I can't explain what happened. I was not on mute, but
Ken, you're on mute now. Keep going, Army.
All right. Well, we'll keep going. So hopefully we'll get Ken back in a second. I am from my car today. Greetings and salutations. The payroll tax provision is a really significant piece of the bill. It allows an employer to defer their portion of payroll taxes from the date of enactment, which was last Friday, through the end of this calendar year, and then to pay them back in 50% installments at the end of 2021 and the end of 2022. So this is a substantial cash flow ability that if you're running a business or have a client running a business, that can help with liquidity and managing through this crisis. And that's a really substantial benefit to talk to your payroll processor with. We do fully expect that it'll take the payroll processors we all use to facilitate direct deposit and stuff for our employees. It'll take them a little while to catch up to this, but you should engage with them and talk about how it's going to work and whether or not you want to avail yourself of that, because it's a substantial liquidity help.
Great. The one thing I'll say relative to our technology issues as we're all working from home, I think as we approach 5,000 people on this call, there's no doubt that we're stretching the system, so to speak. So bear with us. Obviously, with that many people, it's because the fact that this is such important content that you all are dialed in, and so we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to hear and receive the information. And again, I didn't say this at the outset, but all of this will be recorded and will be available afterwards. We'll distribute that and also post it on the website so that folks can get access to it. So with that, anything else on the payroll tax provision, Army, while we move forward here and hopefully can get Ken back into the conversation. You're on mute, Army.
And now I'm on mute. Forgive me. No, I think this one's reasonably self-explanatory, but it is an important element that can help business. So we did want to highlight it again. So
great. So let's move on to the SBA resources, which are significant, and the number of different programs and initiatives that have been unveiled by the stimulus or relief package, I should say, 3.0. Army, you want to just provide a little framing and an overview of those resources, and then we can hopefully have Ken join us again and walk us through some of the provisions and programs a little more deeply.
Sure. So there's three big pieces in this bucket, one of which I want to be sure to highlight because we didn't focus on it as much Friday. If you have a current SBA loan, you already had one prior to the crisis, the SBA will pay all principal, interest, and fees on an existing loan for 6 months to provide economic relief. That's very significant to small businesses who have already availed themselves of the SBA loan programs. The two big loan programs you'll be looking at now are the Paycheck Protection Program, which is new under the stimulus bill that was passed on Friday, and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Couple points for clarification. You can apply for both, but one of the things that is clear and a point of emphasis in all our conversations with the SBA and with the legislators who wrote this is that one of the major deals is you cannot commingle those funds if you take both loans. You really need to keep them separate, and you have to track how you've spent the money. One of the big questions we get is, where do I go to apply for these loans? The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program is a federal loan. You get that direct from the SBA, and I can confirm this morning I was on the SBA website. They do have their new streamlined application for the EIDL loan up. There are lots of questions around eligibility, some of which we'll go through, but it's super simple. If you're in front of your computer, you can go there now. There's a blinking banner at the top that says if you want to apply, this is where you do it, and it's very straightforward. That's a direct loan program from the federal government.
Hey, Army?
Oh, hey, Ken.
Can you guys hear me now?
You can.
Yep. Loud and clear.
Okay, I can't explain why you couldn't hear me before because I was not on mute, but can I just fill in a detail on the payroll tax deferral just because I don't think it got covered and it's
Sure,
kind of
please
important. So it's effective on date of enactment, which is March 27. So that means all employer payroll taxes paid from that date to the end of the year can be deferred and paid later, as Army already pointed out. However, you cannot take both the payroll tax deferral and the loan forgiveness.
Ken, we just lost you on mute again. All right, while we apologize again for the technical difficulties, Army, maybe you can continue with your piece.
Yeah, please, everybody bear with us. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties and we're working to fix them as fast as we can. I think what Kim was about to say is you can't take the payroll tax deferral and the loan forgiveness in the PPP program. But let's go back to the SBA loans and sort of cover the top level and then we'll dig through. And I'm going to try to preemptively answer some of your questions that I know have been coming in. So you have small business loan relief, you have the economic injury disaster loan, which is direct from the government. You apply for that on the SBA's website. The Paycheck Protection Program, which is the new piece, is a 7A loan. What that means is that rather than getting the loan directly from the federal government, you get that loan from your everyday banking institution. And there are links in our memos to the top 7A lenders, but the first place you should go is to contact your regular bank that works with your business and ask them, do they do 7A loans, and begin the process of that discussion with the person who provides your regular liquidity. That loan is backed by the federal government, but it is administered by the banks. If we can go to the next slide. The payroll protection plan is designed for small businesses to preserve employee salaries. It's almost a misnomer to call these bills stimulus because we're not trying to, the government is not trying to stimulate the economy. They're basically massive bridge loan programs to try to help you get through this coronavirus period and pick up right where you left off without any fall off, and to pass that down to employees. The payroll protection plan loans are up to $10 million, payable over 10 years at 4%. 8 weeks worth of the payroll cost, according to a very specific formula, can be converted to forgivable. The way you calculate that, one of the corrections, and as Chris said at the beginning, we're still learning. This is a 900-page bill, and there are lots of nuances given how quickly it was written to react to this crisis. There are lots of nuances about how the provisions work together, and that's why, stepping away, it's really important to go to gammaweb.com or AALU.org and tune back in, because we're refining our analysis based on our conversations with the SBA and Congress as to how these details are worked out. But the loans will equal up to 250% of average monthly total payroll costs during 2019, with a cap on the compensation in that calculation of any one employee of $100,000. So as an example in how you do this, if we paid Chris $150,000 in 2019, only $100,000 of his income would go into that calculation, if that makes sense. Sorry, we went ahead, Chris.
Sorry.
Hey, Army, I'm
yes,
back.
great. Let
I
me
gotta,
do one other detail, Ken, and then I'll let you jump in. One of the other
sure.
questions we've gotten a lot is, how do independent contractors or freelancers factor in to that payroll equation? And the answer is they don't. You can only count that in that calculation of payroll. You count yourself as the business owner, sole proprietors are eligible, and you count your employees. For the first time in this program, individuals who work as independent contractors can apply for their own loans. And the intent of Congress was that they do so. And so if you have a lot of independent contractors in your business, then they can apply for their own loan. They don't factor into your payroll calculation. Ken, did you want to jump in?
Sure. So in terms of, there's a number of different pieces of understanding the SBA loan program, and I would identify four, part of which has already been discussed. But number one is, what is the loan amount maximum? So what is the maximum amount of a loan? What is the actual amount of the loan that you can get? Number three, how much of the loan that you can get can be forgiven? And number four, what portion of the loan forgiveness will get clawed back, and for what reason? Clawed back as in that you will lose part of the loan forgiveness. So Army's already touched on the 250% of average monthly payroll as the maximum amount of the loan. There's also a cap of 10 million. But so that tells you what is the maximum amount of the loan that you can claim. Then the actual amount of the loan is the amount of expenses that you're going to incur between, I think it's February 15 and June 30 for payroll and utilities, rent, interest, basically all your operating expenses. So that's the actual amount of the loan. The portion of the loan that can be forgiven is those expenses for an 8-week period. So it's a shorter period than the period that you can use to determine how much of a loan. So you can get a loan of one amount, but the amount that can be forgiven is limited to the expenses for an 8-week period. The amount of your forgiveness that gets taken away from you is only a function of whether you reduce what you're paying people or lay off the number of people that you're employing during the 8-week period. And I'll give you a very simple example. If at the beginning of the 8-week period you had 4 employees, and somewhere during the 8-week period you laid off one of those employees, your loan forgiveness would be reduced from 100% of the loan for the 8 weeks of expenses to 3/4 of it. In other words, you would lose 25% of the loan forgiveness because you laid off a worker during the 8-week period. If you lay off somebody after the 8-week period, it doesn't have any impact, but it's what happens as to what you do during the 8-week period. And then Army's already talked about process. The intention of the SBA and the administration is to try and make this as easy and simple as possible. So unlike other SBA loans, there's no collateral requirement, there's no personal guarantee. I mean, they are basically trying to strip out any complexity whatsoever. The only thing I'll say though is they're going to be overwhelmed because of the number of people applying, but they are trying to streamline the process, and we expect more guidance in the next couple of days from the administration along those lines. So Army, let me just, I should probably mention one other thing, which is you cannot get both the benefit of the loan forgiveness and I mentioned already the payroll tax deferral. You also cannot get the benefit of the loan forgiveness and the employee retention credit, which we'll discuss in a moment. So basically it means you've got to look at each of those options and decide which one you think is perhaps more beneficial. Let me stop there, Army.
Thanks, Ken. Let me jump in and talk about one key point that I know is of interest to lots of our listeners, which is what is a small business for these purposes? And the rules have been changed for these loan programs in this situation by the recent law. So if you have less than 500 employees, you are now eligible to apply for the payroll protection plan loans and for the emergency disaster loan. If you have more than 500 employees, then you must look to the NAIC code and use that standard. I know we have many members who are in the insurance business and brokerage on the phone and in the assets under management business. So one of the questions I was asking the former chief counsel of the SBA this morning on a telephone call is whether there's a requirement that so much of your business is in one category versus the other in order to qualify, because I know that's a key concern to many of the folks on the line today. The answer was he didn't know, but he's going to help us get an answer, and so we will pursue that. But he did also say that you can apply for these loans and you're going to work with a loan officer at some point in the process, whether it's the emergency loan or the payroll protection loan. It's just a question of whether it's at the SBA or your local bank. And so beginning to engage that process now, submitting an application, getting it in, doesn't obligate you to an end result, and you can begin to have some of those questions. So maybe we should cover the emergency disaster loan program now, unless Chris, you want to bring up any questions yet.
Yeah, no, let's keep moving through, and then we can kind of work through the questions which are populating still. So the emergency.
The emergency loan program, you've got the details up on the slide. The big picture is the maximum allowable loan is $2 million. The payment terms are over 30 years. It's a payment rate, interest rate of 3.75% for small business for profits and 2.75% for nonprofits. That's probably a good time to distinguish eligibility. 501c3s are eligible for both programs, both the emergency program and the PPP program. 501c6s, like chambers of commerce or trade associations, are only eligible for the emergency disaster loan program. We've had a number of questions around the grant related to this. There is in the emergency disaster loan program an option for a $10,000 advance that even if you don't get the loan does not have to be repaid. That's where that question comes from. So you have your answer right there. This eligibility piece of the slide, you'll forgive us as we evolve. The eligibility clarity from Tom Sullivan this morning, again, is less than 500 employees, you are eligible. More than 500 employees, you need that NAIC industry code, and then you have to look at the details there. And you apply again at sba.gov. But let me bring Ken back in for any more details here, and we will keep marching through.
So, Army, I don't have any more details from what we've already discussed on the loan.
Okay.
So
Let me preemptively answer another question, two questions related to that, Chris, and then we can move forward.
Okay.
We've been asked a number of questions. Clearly, COVID-19 hit different parts of the economy in different states at different periods. And so many businesses have already furloughed or laid off employees, which begs the question, since this is payroll protection, what happens? There's an incentive in the payroll protection plan loan program to rehire those employees. And if you rehire them, then they can be part of your calculation for that loan. And there's more detail we can provide in the memo around that. But yes, if you took an action 3 weeks ago in Washington State or New York City that wasn't required in Oklahoma, you can still benefit fully from these programs, but you have to bring those people back on the payroll. The other one,
and to that point, Army, just to emphasize how that works, the amount of the loan forgiveness is determined by reference to all those costs that you incur in a specified 8-week period. So you only get to count payroll costs, obviously, for people that you're paying in that 8-week period. And that's where the incentive is to bring them back onto your payroll, because to the extent you bring them back, that increases the amount of the loan forgiveness that you can qualify for. Sorry, go ahead, Army.
No, it's a great point. The other question we got this morning that's important to a lot of small businesses is if you participate in a PEO or professional, I'm sorry, I can't remember what the acronym is called, but if you basically participate in an organization that allows you to scale to compete for benefits, how do you figure your employee count number? The answer is it's not clear from the legislation, but the trade association that represents those folks is working like gangbusters to get that answer. We're plugging in with them, and so we will track it. I know it's a concern to many people on the phone.
Great. So let's move then to cover the employee retention credit. Want to go back to Ken and talk a little bit about this particular area.
Okay, so the employee retention credit is fairly straightforward. It's a one-time credit equal to 50% of wages that you're paying to employees, but you can only take up to $10,000 worth of wages, which means the maximum amount of the credit is $5,000 per employee. And you can take the payroll tax deferral and the employee retention credit. You cannot, as I said, take the payroll tax deferral and the loan forgiveness. But so the amount of the credit is basically up to $5,000 per employee.
Great. Anything else to add on that, Army, before we move on and then start answering some of these questions here?
Nope. Let's keep moving.
Okay. So net operating loss provisions, Ken. Let's touch on that as well.
Okay. So that's fairly straightforward. In the prior to the 2017 tax bill, a taxpayer that had net operating losses could carry those losses back. I think before 2017, carry them back 2 years and forward like 15 or 18 years. The 2017 Act eliminated the ability to carry losses back. So in other words, it eliminated my ability, if I lost $1 million this year, but I had $1 million of income last year, to carry back my $1 million loss against the income from last year and get a refund of last year's taxes. What the provision in the bill that the president signed last Friday does is changes the carryback rules, and they apply to losses incurred in 2018 and 2019 and the current year, 2020. And it says, with respect to those losses can be carried back 5 years from each of those years. So what it means is if somebody had a loss in 2018, if they had taxable income in 2017, 16, 15, 14, 13, they can carry that loss back and get a refund. And the refunds are processed fairly efficiently. So to the extent people had losses last year or in 2018, it gives them potential access to liquidity. To the extent they have losses this year, it will provide not immediate liquidity, but it will probably, it'll give them the ability to plan on doing the carryback once the tax year ends to get a refund of taxes paid in earlier years. So that's a pretty generous expansion of the net operating loss carryback rules from when they were changed in the 2017 Act.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Anything to add there, Army? And if not, we'll move on to start answering some of these questions while we've got the time here.
Let's go to questions. If you can hear me, Chris, I've had a bit of a unstable internet connection, so I'm going to take off the video if you'll allow and just stick with audio from here out.
Okay, great. That works. So loan forgiveness program. This is a little bit specific, so bear with me here while I ask this question. The question is, are these the correct numbers if you think about this? Say you pay 100 in wages and you borrow 100 from a bank. The loan is forgiven, which is tax-free. So far, you get a net zero cumulative outlay. And you still get a tax deduction for wages paid, saving around $40 in tax. Is the bottom line that you actually can make money here? You guys can follow that.
Okay, so yeah, I think I follow the question. So let me put it in the terms I understood it. I'm paying wages in the 8-week period, and it's the wages I'm paying are below an annualized $100,000 cap, so it's allowable wages. Any wages I pay during that 8-week period, my loan, to the extent I have gotten a loan, is forgiven up to the amount of the wages. So the question is whether or not, in addition, I get to take as a business deduction the cost of the wages. And you know what, I have this nagging feeling there may be something that says I cannot take that deduction, but I can't put my finger on it right now. So what I will do is, once we're off this call, I'll give you guys a written answer so you can post it. But I have a nagging feeling that there is a provision that says I can't also take the business deduction as well. But I'll make sure I get you a specific answer and cite to the provision of the act that answers that, okay?
Great, thanks, Ken. A reminder just to people, this will be, recording will be available, and we will send it out with a link and you can share it.
Chris,
here's a question
let
around, sorry, Army, did you have a comment?
I was just gonna take one while you were, we've got, I think now we're up to over 305 questions. So forgive us while we sort through. Let me grab one. The question was, can sole proprietors who take a normal salary or do not take a normal salary use their income to calculate monthly wage that is eligible for PPP? The answer is yes.
One question here about time period for this. Can we give some clarity around the time period in which this 8 weeks that we've talked about actually occurs, from when to when?
I'm sorry, Chris, could you give me that question again?
Yeah, the time, there's several questions about the time period at play here in terms of taking advantage of these provisions, in particular the loan programs. And we've mentioned 8 weeks. What is the specific time period that we're operating in here?
Okay, so I'm pretty sure it's any loan that you get from the SBA between now and June 30. And when you get the loan, the period that gives rise to your entitlement to have the loan forgiven is the 8-week period of expenses, I think, from the date that the loan, that you get the loan. So in other words, if you got a loan May 30, it would be the 8-week period commencing on May 30 that would tell you what is the amount of all those costs that will give rise to your entitlement to loan forgiveness.
Got it. Okay, here's another one sort of with some specifics around sole proprietorships with no employees. As we think about the forgivable piece, can the owner pay themselves something, or is it just rent, utilities, et cetera? How would that be determined?
Okay, so again, I'm pretty sure in that circumstance, they cannot pay themselves. We had a question on our earlier call about if a sub S corporation that I'm an owner of, also I'm getting wages from it, and we concluded those wages could count. But in the case of a sole proprietor, I don't think those wages will count
Now,
because
what
there are no
about,
wages.
so let's sort of go a little further on the sole proprietorship. Having a staff of 9 people that are paid as 1099 workers, do I qualify for aid as talked about, or do you need to have the people file for unemployment?
Okay, the question said 1099s. Those are normally reports given to people who are not employees. So
if they're structured that way, the question is, as a sole proprietor who's got a staff but they're paid as 1099.
So Chris,
okay.
if they're paid, so
Not
I got this
employed.
answer from the former chief counsel of the SBA this morning. If they're paid as 1099, then you cannot count them in your calculation. They have to make their own application to the SBA or to a 7A lender.
And technically, part of the reason that's the correct answer is that payroll costs under the statute that you can count for purposes of your 8-week period and also for purposes of your maximum loan amount are payroll costs to employees. It specifically says employees. So that is why Army's answer is dead on.
Yep. Okay, so there's been a lot of questions around guidance from the government and the various agencies. One person asks, we're hearing from banks that they're still waiting on guidance from SBA as to what is needed for employers to apply, and they may not know this for a week or more. Any insights that either of you have on that question?
I mean,
well, go ahead, Army.
I mean, this is
Well, no,
as a reminder.
yeah.
As a reminder.
You go ahead.
Great. I'll go first. You go second. As
Okay.
a reminder, for the emergency loan, that's an SBA loan. The application is up. Go to sba.gov. It's right there at the top. This question relates to the PPP loan because those are 7A loans offered by banking institutions inside the United States. Our written memo, which has been distributed in a number of different ways and is available at gammaweb.com or aalu.org, also has a list of the top 100 7A lenders. But the first place to go is to contact your financial institution you work with regularly. It may take a few days, given that this is a brand new program, for that to come online. But that may also vary and be dependent on which financial institution you are working with.
Yeah, and the only thing I was going to add to that is I think this is going to come pretty darn quick because there is a sense of serious urgency to start pushing these loans out. So I would expect we're going to see guidance from the administration today or even tomorrow.
Great. So going back to the PPP, so this question says we have 5 employees, 3 of which have already been furloughed because they're in Pennsylvania, forced closure of the construction industry. So if they decide to apply for PPP, do they need to bring back those employees before they apply, or should they wait, or can they wait until they know that it will be approved?
Well, okay, so if they're saying if I get my loan approval, I will hire those people back, that's kind of what I understood that the question implies. That in those circumstances, then in identifying your loan amount and in identifying the potential forgiveness, I would think you could include the payroll costs that you anticipate incurring by bringing those people back on board once the loan is approved. And and you would also get to count those amounts in determining the amount of your loan forgiveness, because the amount of the loan forgiveness is a consequence of what you actually pay in that 8-week period. And again, as I understand the question, it's anticipated you will be paying those people that you have currently furloughed during the 8-week period because you plan to bring them back on the payroll if you get your loan. So that's how I would answer that.
Anything further there, Army, on Ken's comments?
No, I think that's right. You know, the SBA official I was speaking with this morning, you know, he wanted to emphasize and have us remind everybody that this is an interactive process. It's not a fire into a dark hole kind of process. And so if you get your application started, you can work through those details when you speak with a loan officer.
Here's one we've received as it relates to, it says, how does PPP or EIDL apply to statutory employees? For more specifically, the question is insurance agents that are W-2 treated as independent contractors. Any insights there on that?
Okay, I believe that the correct answer would be if they're getting W-2s that they count towards your payroll costs for purposes of both the loan amount and the forgiveness amount. But clearly we're going to want to give that just a little more thought because it could be relevant to a lot of our guys. But I'm pretty sure if you're issuing W-2s, then you're going to count them in your payroll costs.
Yeah, one of the things that I'll say, in addition, just going back to the question about guidance, we will certainly be providing real-time analysis around the guidance. We will have the opportunity to jump on another call like this as we unpack that guidance and better understand it, so that you all are getting the benefit of the most recent information and analyses with both Ken and Army. So stay tuned on that, and we will certainly widely disseminate, as we've done with this call, that information when we have the opportunity to do that. Here's a question. Many of us receive from our career carriers, so these are seemingly mostly the mutual companies, W-2 income, which is really commissions. Again, just going a little deeper here, how is that handled if we apply for a payroll forgiveness plan with the SBA?
Okay, I'm slightly confused by that question because that's a person who's receiving payments from an insurance company as compensation. So that would be part of the payroll of the insurance company, not of the individual receiving the payment. So I'm not exactly sure what the question is.
We'll ask for clarification if whoever asked that can do that. Here's another one here on the healthcare side. So this person says, I'm a healthcare provider who has worked part-time as an independent contractor in a non-essential specialty. They have no W-2 income. Their self-employment income has ceased. So the question is, will they be able to apply for the PPP and borrow to replace their average monthly lost income? And would that average monthly growth be average monthly gross or net? And will the loan be forgiven? They posit that it might be applicable to others who receive a significant portion of income as 1099.
Okay, so I think the answer to that is largely no, because as I understood the facts, I didn't identify that anybody had payroll costs that they were paying. And the PPP loans are clearly designed to provide resources to businesses to keep people employed and pay operating expenses, as opposed to, they're not designed to replace lost income. They're designed to compensate employers for keeping people on the payroll and paying the cost of operating the business. So I think the answer to that question is, as I said, is largely probably no.
So Ken, let me come back with a clarification on that previous question. Someone wrote back to clarify the point about statutory employee insurance agents essentially run their own business. They're not paid wages or salary, and many of them are losing income because there are few people to sell to. So are they eligible to use the PPP or anything else here to survive as they are challenged by the circumstances? They have overhead and staff that they have to obviously take care of.
Okay, so if it's somebody who has a business and they have employees and they have the various costs of running a business like rent, utilities, interest on mortgage obligations, that would be a circumstance where they're eligible for a PPP loan. But it would require them during the 8-week period that we keep referring to actually be paying their employees and obviously paying these other expenses associated with operating a business. The good news, since we're talking specifically about insurance agents, is that in the rules that define, in the SBA rules generally that say certain businesses are excluded from qualifying for SBA loans, this was pre the legislation that was just enacted. One of the specifically excluded businesses is life insurance companies, but what the regulation specifically says is, note, this does not include agents and apparently not brokers. So in other words, even before the legislation was enacted, it was contemplated that SBA loans could generally be available to insurance agents, and there's nothing in the legislation that would cause us to think that is not the case.
Great, thanks, Ken. Here's another one. This is sort of unique and interesting, just given circumstances. So, and I don't know if we have the insights here, but I'll ask the question. If the stay-home order in your state or municipality gets extended into May, businesses will be forced to furlough their employees longer. So how does that, if we know, affect the 8-week window for forgiveness and the use by date of June 30th?
So, go ahead, Army.
No, I was just going to say it wouldn't. So it's a two-part answer, right? If you want to use them in your calculation, you have to keep them on payroll. That's the way the system is designed. If this goes on substantially longer than initially anticipated, and we haven't really touched on this yet, Chris, there is the anticipation of a phase 4 bill, another bill coming from Congress, in which one could anticipate that one of the things they might evaluate is extending some of these benefits and some of these windows, but that certainly remains to be seen at this point. Ken?
So that was exactly the point I was going to make, which is if we see a prolonged shelter-in-place requirement that makes it practically impossible to bring people back on the payroll because they can't work from home, I think it's very possible we see the June 30 date pushed out so that it allows people to apply for loans later than that, and which would commence the 8-week period later than that. So it commenced the 8-week period when it's practically actually possible to bring people back on the payroll.
Great. So we've got a few minutes left here. I want to try to take a couple more questions, and then we've got some announcements we want to make available to folks. So here's one. So they're in a construction company and still working. Is there any ability to apply for any payroll or small business loans, or does the fact that they're up and running and working exclude them from taking advantage of this particular set of programs?
Chris, would you repeat that one more time? I missed part of it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sure. So, so the question is, they're in construction, the firm, and employees are still working, but they're obviously concerned about sort of where the economics go here. And the question is, are they able to apply for any of the payroll or small business loans now, or does the fact that they're working currently exclude them from the ability to take advantage?
Okay, so the answer is they clearly are eligible. In fact, their fact pattern is a pretty good one because they are planning to keep people on their payroll. And so that clearly is a circumstance where they would be eligible for the loan, subject to all the stuff we've talked about, maximum loan, 10 million, actual loan expenses, and the forgiveness amount. So yeah, they would be entitled.
Great. So we've got a couple minutes left, and I want to say once again.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Chris, can I come back to? I've gotten a clarification. I think it's a pretty solid clarification on this issue of whether or not you can both deduct the wages and take a business deduction, notwithstanding the fact that you got loan forgiveness that was calculated in part by reference to the payment of those wages. In looking at the bill, we cannot find anything that says you don't also get the business deduction. So it appears to us that you can both deduct the amount, and that amount can be part of the calculation of your debt forgiveness calculation, okay?
Great. Thanks for the clarity on that, Ken. Very helpful to folks who are concerned and ask the question. So I just want to thank both Ken and Army for the opportunity to be with us this afternoon, and thank all of you for listening in. We had over 525 questions, so obviously couldn't get to all of those. We will sort through those, utilize those to conduct our additional analysis. The one thing I will say for those of you particularly who are in the financial security profession, we'd love to have you join us from an advocacy perspective. This obviously highlights the importance of what advocacy is all about, making your voice heard. And we can connect you with your representatives in Congress. If you go to alu.quorum.us/officials, we can have you insert your information and connect you up over time with your policymakers so they can help directly. You as constituents, our big program around building relationships with policymakers is called the Ambassador Program, and we'd love for you to join us. I'll also say that for those of you who are not members of ALU Gamma, please consider joining. Go to unifytheprofession.org, and all the information there is available for you to understand the benefits of membership, like a call with 5,000 people where experts are answering your questions real time about how you can help your clients, your employees, your business succeed in times of challenge and change. So if that's not value, I'm not sure what value is defined as. So we'd love for you to be a part of the organization that we're building to unify and elevate the financial security profession. Just a couple of notes about programming to come. Tomorrow at 11 a.m., we will have Susan Neely, the Chief Executive Officer of the American Council of Life Insurers, join Mark Caden, our CEO, for discussion about what life insurance companies are doing to navigate the crisis together with agents and organizations such as ALU. Thursday at 11 a.m., we will also have a webinar for those in the industry around underwriting in a socially distant world to provide insights there about what's happening in real time in the marketplace. And I will say, as we talked about, stay tuned for real-time analyses once we do get some guidance this week, perhaps, around these small business loan programs. We will put together another opportunity for Ken and Army to join us to walk us through what that looks like. And next week, we'll be unpacking the individual provisions in the relief package for those who are interested. So thank you. Please stay safe and well, and we will be in touch. Go to alu.org or gammaweb.com for more information on COVID-19, navigating the crisis together. Have a great afternoon.